Hey everyone, it's Alexander, the real Mr. Robinson, and here's my long-awaited spoiler review for Avengers Endgame. I know the movie's been out for over a month, and it's close to beating Avatar in terms of being the highest-grossing movie of all time. But, Godzilla kept me busy. I've been making so many Godzilla videos that I just didn't have time to do this one. Now, unlike my spoiler review for Godzilla King of the Monsters, I'm actually going to go in order that the movie takes place. I'm going to list all my favorite moments and just the stuff that I couldn't talk about. Without further ado, let's talk about the very first scene of the movie, which is Clint Barton and his family at his ranch. So, like with Scott Lang, Clint Barton decided to go under house arrest for 2 years after the events of Civil War. And it seems like he got the best deal because he's got his own farm, a massive ranch, so he's got the best life right now. He's teaching his daughter how to use a bow and arrow, they're about to have hot dogs, and just a fun family picnic. And just as his daughter goes to grab her arrow, Clint turns around to say something to his wife, but when he turns back around, daughter's gone. He doesn't know what happened, but we see little dust particles, and then he turns around again, and the rest of his family's gone. And we hear nothing but thunder in the sky, and we know what happened. Even a year after we saw all these other characters get snapped away and turned into dust, it's still kind of haunting. And then we cut to the Marvel Studios logo, and one thing that I noticed is that when you watch the Marvel logo, every character that got snapped away is not in the logo. It's just the surviving characters right there. So if there's a shot that they show in the logo of, like, say, Wanda Maximoff or Sam Wilson or Stephen Strange, it's just nothing. It's kind of bizarre, but also very clever. Then we cut back onto the Guardians of the Galaxy ship, where Tony Stark and Nebula are pretty much playing paper football. I've never heard of it, but looks fun. And Nebula is just so tense throughout it, but Tony Stark walks her through the game, tells her to just have fun with it, and that she doesn't need to grab the paper as soon as it comes flying towards her, that she just has to hold the position. And it's a neat moment because Tony Stark's just trying to take the stress after what he just witnessed. And it's a good moment for Nebula because this is the very first time she's ever had any fun whatsoever, because her whole life has been being tortured by Thanos, feeling unloved by him and Gamora up until the events of Volume 2. It's just a very touching moment. And then we get a montage of Tony Stark and Nebula just trying to survive. They get the ship working for just a little bit until it craps out. And apparently this whole scene takes place 21 or 22 days after the events of Infinity War. And with all hope lost, Tony Stark is just waiting for death. Nebula can handle it because she's partly a cyborg, but she moves Tony Stark into the captain's chair after he records a message for Pepper Potts, and he's just waiting for death. And then all of a sudden, this bright light shows up right in front of the ship, and it turns out to be Carol. And the first time I saw this movie, I just thought, wait, did I miss something? Because Carol just managed to find the ship so easily. But then we cut to Avengers headquarters where Steve Rogers has pretty much finished shaving, and then I realized, oh, that mid-credit scene in Captain Marvel was actually not going to be in this movie. It was just like when you watch Thor, the first Thor, and the scene where Dr. Selvig gets recruited by Nick Fury, that's not meant to be in the Avengers. Or the mid-credit scene in Winter Soldier where we first see the Maximoffs for the first time. That scene is not in Age of Ultron. But anyway, Carol comes back to Earth with the ship, probably because Rocket knew where it was and had a tracker. So Tony Stark is saved, but he is so sickly and weak that he's just put in a hospital bed. And then Carol decides, I'm going to go off and kill Thanos, but she has no idea where he is. Nobody knows where he is except for Nebula. And this is mainly due to two reasons. Thanos would always talk to Nebula about what he's going to do after he wipes out half of humanity. And Thanos pretty much gave himself away to the rest of the Avengers when Rocket discovered that the same energy pulse that the Infinity Gauntlet left on Earth happened again on another planet. So everyone comes to the conclusion that Thanos used the stones again, and the Avengers are all geared up, ready to go. They head to the planet where they plan to get the stones for themselves and use them to bring everyone back. And it turns out that Thanos is the only one on this planet. He's just hanging out on his farm. He's very weak because using the stones twice has burnt up the left side of his face, and the arm that's holding the gauntlet is just so skinny compared to his other arm. So anyway, he's just farming, he's living a peaceful life, and then the Avengers just get down to business. Carol flies in, has Thanos in a headlock. Banner in the Hulkbuster armor comes from out of the floor and grabs the gauntlet. Meanwhile, Rhodey in the War Machine armor comes out of the ceiling and grabs the other arm. Thor comes in and swings Stormbreaker to chop off Thanos' gauntlet arm. And I love this moment because the Avengers have pretty much turned into an angry mob. They are not f***ing around, and they get right down to business. So you think, oh, they got him. But when Rocket turns the gauntlet over, the stones are gone. And Thanos pretty much tells them that he destroyed the stones by pretty much using the stones. And just as Rhodey suspects that Thanos is lying and they have to conduct a search, Nebula pretty much confirms to everyone that Thanos is not lying. And at the very moment when Thanos thanks Nebula for sticking up for him and saying perhaps he treated her too harshly, Thor swings Stormbreaker and decapitates Thanos. And that's all the first 10 minutes of the movie. And the first time I saw this movie, I was sitting there going, whoa! Because they killed Thanos. They killed the Mad Titan in the first 10 minutes, but they still lost. The stones are gone forever, and Thor has suffered the most when it comes to it, because he was the one responsible for not going for the head for the first time. Because of that, Thanos managed to destroy the stones with no hope of bringing everyone back. So that moment just ends on a downer. And then we cut to 5 years later, where everyone else is just trying to live out their lives as best they can. Tony Stark has it the best because he's now married with Pepper, they have a kid, a 5-year-old girl, Morgan. A lot of the other characters are spread throughout the universe. Nebula and Rocket are in one part of the galaxy. Carol Danvers is in another part with, I gotta say, a haircut that I wasn't too fond of. I never really was a fan of Carol Danvers with the short hair, but Brie Larson manages to make it work for me. Rhodey is off somewhere trying to find Clint Barton because he lost his mind and became Ronin. And Okoye is apparently ruler of Wakanda now, unless Queen Mother survived, but T'Challa and Shuri were both snapped away. And so everyone pretty much answers to Natasha and Steve Rogers. Rogers is pretty much running a therapy group for everyone who lost people during the snap, and his whole job is to tell people that they should move on and that it's not the end of the world. But he just can't, and neither can Natasha, who is just broken. Then as for Bruce Banner, he has spent 18 months in a gamma lab putting himself and the Hulk together to pretty much make Professor Hulk. So the Hulk pretty much went from an enormous green rage monster to the Jolly Green Giant. Quite literally, because the stuff they do with Professor Hulk is awesome, and the motion capture work is just incredible. Thanos still looks amazing in this movie, but Professor Hulk just looks unbelievable in terms of a CGI character. So yeah, all these characters are just going about their lives. Some are doing well, others not so much. But I will say one thing before I get into the rest of the story. With Captain Marvel, that was actually one of my bigger disappointments with the movie, because she's barely in it. Now, the reason she's not in this movie that much is because Brie Larson shot Avengers ENDGAME before there was even a script for Captain Marvel, so there was no clear idea of what they wanted to do with her character, so it makes sense to have her be in the movie for a short period of time. And I'm okay with that. I still think Brie Larson does a good job with what she has. Sure, she doesn't have the same charisma that some of the other actors do, but she's the new one. I still think she's a good pick for Carol Danvers, and I still think they're going to do her justice as the MCU continues. So yeah, that's what's going on with the characters. Then we cut to San Francisco, and we see that Scott Lang's van has been impounded. You know, the one that was throughout Ant-Man and Ant-Man the Wasp. Because last time we saw Scott Lang, he was sucked up into the quantum realm due to the mini quantum tunnel at the back of the van. And unfortunately, the Pyms and Van Dynes were snapped away, leaving him trapped there. And then, for some reason, a rat crawls right on the quantum tunnel controls, activates it, and spits Scott Lang out of the quantum realm. and Scott Lang has no idea what's going on. He's trapped in the compound area, but is released by Senior Chang, which is another cool Community cameo, and he eventually finds out what happened, hoping that his loved ones, especially his daughter Cassie, were not snapped away. But he finds his own name on the murals in San Francisco. He has a short reunion with his daughter, who's now 15 years old, and it's very touching. It's a very, very heartfelt scene, and that's one thing this movie absolutely gets right, is that the emotion here is stronger than ever. It really does a fantastic job of making these larger-than-life characters human. So Scott eventually makes his way to the Avengers compound, and to the shock of both Steve Rogers and Natasha, they thought he was dead, but he pops up, and he basically explains that while 5 years has gone by, he's been stuck in the quantum realm for 5 hours. So they could possibly use the quantum realm for time travel. They approach Tony Stark, who has no interest in doing it, but he eventually just has so much guilt and finds a way to successfully work time travel that he eventually comes back to help. And then they eventually go to Bruce, who has no idea what he's doing. Like, time travel is out of his field. He's more of an expert on gamma radiation and not the quantum realm. So it's not until Tony Stark comes back to Avengers HQ where he agrees to help him out on the one condition that he has to save everything that he has. Which is good, because the way time travel works in this movie is quite different from every other movie that has come before it. In every movie that takes time travel seriously or has established rules, like Back to the Future, you can't change the past because it'll alter your history. With this movie, if you alter the past or change anything, it's just going to create an alternate timeline. It's not going to affect your timeline at all, so whatever happened in the past in your timeline still happened in the past, and nothing's going to change that. So yeah, Tony's back. He gives Steve his shield back, which is a very cool moment, which is probably the closest to a reunion we'll get from these two, where Tony Stark and Steve Rogers now have full faith in each other again. Especially from Tony, considering he's the one that lost all faith in Steve. But yeah, they get the whole gang back except for Carol, because she's worlds away and is not going to be back for a long period of time. She even mentions that to Natasha. But Rocket and Nebula are close enough to come back to Earth. Rocket and Hulk eventually head to New Asgard, where they recruit Thor again, who has really suffered the worst. He's basically become Jeff Lebowski. He's fat, he's grown out his beard, he's an alcoholic. And I gotta say, the first time I saw this movie, I didn't like Fat Thor. But watching it again, it's like, wow, this is actually another sign of grief. All the other characters have their methods of moving on, whether they've actually moved on or they're just in denial. Thor is just completely shit-faced. He is drunk. He is just... It's just sad to watch Thor in this movie. But yeah, all these characters get back together. Clint Barton is eventually found by Natasha in Tokyo and is brought in. They test out the time travel. Clint manages to grab a baseball glove from his ranch from another timeline and bring it back to theirs. So the how works. Then they spend the time trying to figure out where the Infinity Stones are. And they're split up into 4 teams. The first team consists of Steve, Scott, Tony, and Bruce, as they head to New York City in 2012 to get the Time Stone from the Ancient One, the Space Stone, which was used by Loki during the Battle of New York, and the Scepter, which contained the Mind Stone, which was also used by Loki in the Battle of New York. Thor and Rocket head to Asgard to get the ether from Jane Foster. Rhodes and Nebula head to Morag in 2014 to get the Power Stone, and then Natasha and Clint head to Vormir to get the Soul Stone at the same time. And this is a really cool aspect of the film, because the movie gets to recreate all these events from the past MCU movies. I mean, the first time we head back to New York in 2012 and we see moments of the Battle of New York from a different perspective is awesome, because The Avengers is one of my favorite Marvel movies. But of course there's conflict with a lot of these moments. Banner has a difficult time explaining to the Ancient One why he needs the Time Stone, and seeing the Ancient One again played by Tilda Swinton was a huge surprise. I didn't know she was in the movie. And it's in this moment where they further explain the concept of time travel in this series, just in case you didn't get the first time around. And it's not until Bruce Banner reveals to the Ancient One that Stephen Strange gave Thanos the Time Stone willingly, that she gives him the Time Stone from her reality. Boy, this is confusing. And tells him that Stephen Strange is supposed to be the best of everyone, and that if he gave the Time Stone to Thanos willingly, he did it for a reason. Which we all knew that in Infinity War, when he said there's only one outcome out of 14 million where the Avengers win against Thanos. Steve Rogers gets the scepter, and they recreate the elevator moment from Winter Soldier, but in a different light. Because Strike Team, aka Hydra, comes in to take the scepter from the Avengers, and the Avengers of 2012 don't know that they're Hydra. So the Steve Rogers from 2023 comes into the elevator, and we all think, oh shit, it's about to go down again. Because the last time Steve Rogers was surrounded in an elevator, he beat the shit out of everyone. So we're thinking, it's on now. He says with confidence that he's going to take the scepter. Everyone else, considering that they're Hydra, is not on board with it. They're not going to allow him to take the scepter. And at the moment where we think Steve Rogers is going to fight everyone in the elevator, he leans into Jasper Sitwell and goes, "Hail Hydra." And that is another case of Steve Rogers being the smartest guy in the room, even if he's not the toughest guy in the room. And because everyone else thinks that he's actually Hydra, he walks out with the scepter, no problem. That is until he gets encountered by his 2012 counterpart. They have a brief fight, but the Steve Rogers from 2023 manages to knock out the Steve Rogers from 2012 with the scepter, and then he stands up, takes the scepter, and then marvels at his 2012's ass. Yeah, that's another thing with this movie. When Tony Stark sees the Steve Rogers from 2012, he pretty much comments about how that suit did nothing for his ass, and Scott Lang just compliments Steve by saying, "As far as I'm concerned, that's America's ass." And Steve is annoyed because he's like, nobody asked you to look. And at the end of that Captain America versus Captain America fight, he just looks down and goes, "Yeah, that is America's ass." And I laughed at those moments, but at the same time, I'm like, damn it, Marvel. Chris Evans is at the top of my straight exceptions list. Do you have to point out the fact that he has a good ass? I'm making this weirder than it actually is. Let's move on. So the last conflict in 2012 is the Space Stone. Tony Stark and Scott Lang managed to get the stone for a while, but unfortunately they get knocked out by the Hulk, and then the Tesseract flies towards Loki. Loki manages to grab it and escape, so they screwed up on that part. And on top of all that, Loki in this alternate timeline is somewhere else. So yeah, they screw up, and the problem there is that they only have enough Pym particles for one jump to the destination and one jump back. But Tony Stark knows of a place where he and Steve can go grab the Tesseract again and grab more Pym particles. So they go to a S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters in 1970, and this is a very important moment for both Steve and Tony. Because as Tony grabs the Tesseract successfully, he encounters his father, Howard Stark, and they get into a conversation, and it's a great moment because Tony Stark never had that opportunity to reconcile with his dad before the Winter Soldier killed him. Of course, Howard doesn't know that this man is his son, but they have a conversation. Howard Stark reveals that his wife is expecting. He asks Tony how fatherhood is like and how he dealt with it. And it's a very touching moment and ends with Tony Stark hugging his dad. And it's just touching. And again, it goes back to making these superheroes human. And Steve Rogers has a moment where he sees Peggy Carter again. And the last time we even saw Peggy was at her funeral in Civil War. So this plays into effect later on in the movie. I'll get back to that a little later. But it's a touching scene when Steve sees Peggy again. Even if he's hiding behind some window blinds and she can't see him. Now let's cut to Asgard 2013. Thor's having issues with the mission because he has to see Jane Foster again, but more importantly, he has to see his mother again, or avoid her, considering that there are two Thors in this timeline. So Rocket has to do all the work, but Thor encounters his mother, who realizes that this is not the same Thor. He's a Thor from a different timeline. And again, much like with Tony Stark and his father, this is a nice moment for Thor to reconcile with his mother and have one last moment before she eventually gets killed by Malekith. It's a touching moment, and right before Thor and Rocket head back to the future, Thor wants to see if he's still worthy, so he sticks his hand out, waits for Mjolnir because it takes a while to come, and he grabs it, realizing that he's still worthy, and that just makes him even happier. So then we cut to Morag in 2014. Nebula and Rhodes have to wait for Star-Lord to show up just so they can grab the tools needed to get the Power Stone, which results in a funny moment because they recreate the opening credits from Guardians of the Galaxy. And there's a moment where we see it from Rhodes and Nebula's perspective where he's just an idiot singing to himself with no music. And it's a funny moment right there. And of course there is a conflict with this situation, but we'll get back to that a little later. Let's head to Vormir, where Natasha and Clint head there to get the Soul Stone. But we know what happened in Infinity War, where the Soul Stone requires a sacrifice to really understand its meaning. So we know one of these characters is not coming back. And what's funny is, for the longest time, we debated on who was going to die in this movie. Was it going to be Tony Stark? Was it going to be Steve Rogers? Could it be Thor? Never once did we consider Natasha would be the one to die. During a small fight between her and Clint, where they argue about who's gonna be the sacrifice for the Soul Stone, Natasha does it because Clint still has a family. And I gotta say, for this moment when Natasha dies, I didn't feel anything. Not because I didn't like the character, but because they kind of recreate this moment from Infinity War where Gamora is the sacrifice, except this time it's a self-sacrifice. But I thought, okay, Gamora's got to come back. So if Gamora's coming back in one way or another, then Natasha's got to come back as well. Well, that's the thing. Gamora does come back in this movie, but it's the Gamora from this timeline in 2014, where she has yet to meet the Guardians of the Galaxy. The Gamora that we know is long dead, which means the Natasha that we know is permanently dead as well. So that just made me sad once I actually realized the truth, and that there was no coming back. So that's the conflict, but Clint gets the Soul Stone at the cost of Natasha's sacrifice. And then we cut to the major conflict of the movie, where now that there are two nebulas in 2014, their minds are linked. So the nebula from 2014 that still serves Thanos manages to get recordings of everything that the nebula that we know has, which means that Thanos from 2014 sees his destiny, sees that he got all the stones, wiped out half the universe, but got decapitated for it, and that Nebula would be opposing him. So the Avengers successfully have all the stones, but Thanos knows what's going on. So the Nebula we know gets kidnapped, gets swapped by the 2014 Nebula, goes back in time with the rest of the Avengers. And as the Avengers put together the new gauntlet with all the stones, the 2014 Nebula manages to bring in Thanos' ship from the past into the future, just as Professor Hulk successfully snaps everyone back into existence. And I love the moment where we know that everyone's back, because all it is a simple phone call from Clint's wife. And the look of joy and relief on Clint Barton's face is very good. Again, it's very heartfelt and touching. But then Thanos' ship bombards the entire facility and reduces it to nothing but a smoldering crater. And then as 2014 Nebula goes to find the gauntlet, Thanos just sits in the rubble and waits for the Avengers. And then Thor, Steve, and Tony all confront Thanos, as Thanos pretty much tells them, "You could not live with your own failure. Where did that lead you? Back to me." And then he basically explains what he witnessed and what his new motivation is. He explains that if you wipe out half the universe, there will be those that remember what was and are unable to accept what is. So his new plan is to basically create a new universe. And as Steve says, it would be born of blood, but according to Thanos, when he creates this new universe, it'll be rid of the Avengers, so nobody will ever tell anybody in this new universe that Thanos wiped out all of the universe to create this new one. But of course, the Avengers are not letting that happen. Clint manages to escape with the gauntlet, but Gamora from 2014 helps the Nebula that we know, and the 2014 Nebula is killed. Again, it doesn't affect the Nebula that we know because the 2014 Nebula is from a different timeline. So, again, God, this is confusing. I'm just going to skip it. Basically, the bad Nebula is killed, good Nebula is alive, the gauntlet is safe for now, and the main three Avengers are fighting Thanos. And Tony Stark is knocked out. Thor has both Stormbreaker and Mjolnir. And I love how, for being fat, his powers are not reduced. He is still the almighty god of thunder. Thor manages to lose Mjolnir for a second. Then he calls in Stormbreaker, but Thanos grabs Stormbreaker and is trying to shove the blade into Thor's chest. And then you see Mjolnir being lifted off the ground. And I kid you not, the first time I saw this movie, I thought, oh, Thor's calling in Mjolnir. It hits Thanos, goes past both of them, and then it goes the opposite direction. I'm like, wait, Thor didn't call it. Holy shit! He's worthy! Steve Rogers is worthy! And I love Thor's reaction to it, where he goes, I knew it. Because there was that moment in Age of Ultron where Steve was closest to lifting Mjolnir, and apparently he could lift it, but chose not to out of respect for Thor. And I'd known in the comics that Steve Rogers was worthy, but the reason I forgot about this moment is because Mjolnir was destroyed in Thor Ragnarok, so I thought, well, there goes any chance of Steve Rogers lifting Mjolnir. Oh, the beauty of time travel, because Steve Rogers takes Mjolnir and kicks Thanos' ass. But eventually, Thanos overpowers Steve Rogers, knocks Mjolnir out of his hand, and Thanos' sword is apparently made out of a steel that is stronger than vibranium, because he manages to chip away the shield out of pure anger. And Steve Rogers is on the ground, his legs cut, his arms cut, but he's not giving up. As long as he's standing, there's at least one person keeping Thanos away from winning. But then Thanos pretty much calls his entire army together. The Chitauri, the Sakarans, his entire army is here. And he says that in all my years of conquest, I never took it personally. But in this instance, you changed my motivation. I saw what happens if I wiped out half the universe. So I'm going to enjoy destroying your planet. And it results in my absolute favorite shot in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, where Steve Rogers is looking out at Thanos and the entire army. And then the best part of the movie happens. In his earpiece, Steve Rogers manages to hear Sam Wilson, who we all saw get snapped away. And then a portal opens, and Sam just says, "On your left." And then we see Okoye, T'Challa, Shuri walk out of the portal, which led to Wakanda. And then as Sam Wilson flies out of the portal, a whole bunch of portals open, and it's just an amazing moment that I'm starting to tear up at how amazing this moment is, because Alan Silvestri's score for this moment is absolutely incredible. It's an Oscar-worthy score, in my opinion. And then everyone who got taken out in Infinity War comes back. Stephen Strange, Drax, Mantis, Peter Quill, Peter Parker, Bucky, Groot, Wanda Maximoff, Hope Van Dyne, the entire armies of Wakanda, the armies of Asgard, the Ravagers. We even see Howard the Duck in a very brief blink and you'll miss it cameo as Hope Van Dyne pops back up. Then Pepper Potts shows up in the rescue armor, Valkyrie shows up on her Pegasus, Ant-Man becomes Giant Man and breaks out of the rubble of Avengers facility with Professor Hulk, whose right arm is now damaged. James Rhodes pops up in an upgraded and bulkier War Machine armor with Rocket on his shoulder. The music's swelling, Captain America has his army together, and then for the very first time, and probably the only time, Steve Rogers says, "Avengers, assemble." And then it's this big, giant Lord of the Rings Return of the King style battle where the Avengers fight Thanos, and it is just probably the greatest comic book fight scene ever made, because it's just epic, it's got everything you want to see, and it is just all kinds of awesome. And we see that all these characters, good or bad, are more relentless than ever. And there's so many great little moments that are nods back to the previous films. Peter Parker gets that long-deserved hug from Tony Stark. T'Challa manages to remember Clint's name after he said, "I don't care" in Civil War. Hope Van Dyne calls Steve Rogers Cap after she kind of made fun of Scott for calling him that in Ant-Man and the Wasp. There are just so many great callbacks to previous films. But now the real meat of the battle is that they have to take the Infinity Stones back to where they were in the first place. And the only time machine that they have is the miniature quantum tunnel in Scott Lang's van. And since Clint Barton is just a mere mortal, he gives the gauntlet to T'Challa. He manages to get pretty far with it, but Thanos knocks him out, and just as Thanos goes for the gauntlet, Wanda interferes, and you know that since Thanos killed Vision, and Vision's not coming back, Wanda is pissed. As the old saying goes, "Hell hath no fury like a woman's scorn." And Wanda unleashes all of her powers against Thanos, knocks the sword from his hands, and is almost about to rip Thanos apart into several pieces until he orders his ship to rain fire on the battlefield. Even if it kills some of his army, it will break Wanda's concentration, and it'll hopefully kill some members on the opposing side. And it's just raining hellfire as Peter Parker's trying to get the gauntlet to the time machine, even activates instant kill to take out some of the aliens. But to no avail, the good guys are overpowered, And then the ship stops firing and then fires into the skies as we see Carol Danvers rocket in from the atmosphere just in time and destroys Thanos' ship. And sure, it comes across as a bit of Deus Ex Machina, but she was already introduced in the movie, so it would be weird if she never came back, so I'm grateful for this moment. And if nothing else, this moment gives me chills every time I watch it. And then we get probably the most controversial moment of the movie, and it lasts for maybe 20 seconds. And that's where Parker gives Carol the gauntlet, and then all the other women come in and are pretty much by her side. Wanda, Valkyrie, Mantis, Okoye, Shuri, Gamora, Nebula, Pepper, you get it. And it's pretty much an A-Force moment, which is pretty much the all-female Avengers group. Does it come across as forced and kind of inorganic? Maybe, but I love that moment regardless. So all the women pretty much clear Carol a path to the time machine, but Thanos destroys the quantum tunnel, and there's only a few people standing left. It's Tony Stark who tries to grab the gauntlet from Thanos but is knocked to the side, and then Thor tries to kill Thanos with both Mjolnir and Stormbreaker as Steve Rogers has him in a headlock. Thanos knocks both of them out. Carol then comes in, manages to stand toe-to-toe with Thanos, but Thanos just grabs her hand and tosses her to the side like a rag doll. Thanos has the gauntlet now. He puts it on his hand, and just as he's about to snap his fingers, Carol comes back, holds the gauntlet open just like Steve did in Infinity War, and she manages to overpower Thanos, to the point that when Thanos tries to headbutt Carol like he did with Thor, she feels nothing because she is in full binary mode, and just at the point where she's about to win it all, Thanos grabs the Power Stone from the gauntlet and uses it to knock Carol out for good. And that's a shocking moment because we all thought that Carol Danvers, whether you liked her or not, she was going to be the one to change everything. She was the one who was going to take out Thanos, but she wasn't. So this is a shock to Tony Stark, and then Stephen Strange just lifts one finger, reminding him that they only have this one chance. So Thanos puts the gauntlet on again, manages to wrestle Tony for a bit, but knocks him to the side, and Thanos says, "I am inevitable." But nothing happens. Thanos realizes that the stones are gone and Tony Stark now has them. He now has all the stones in his power and goes, "And I am Iron Man." And then all of Thanos' forces are dusted away, with Thanos being the last one to go, who just kind of sits down and accepts his fate. He doesn't make a big deal about it, he doesn't throw a fit, he just accepts it and dies. Of course, this is also at the cost of Tony dying because of the power of the stones. And this moment broke me. Because I had watched all the movies prior to this one, I just felt so sad. I was uncontrollably upset. And I know it's a fictional character, but for playing Tony Stark for 11 years and being the best interpretation, it's sad. So Tony Stark has a private funeral where all the characters are there, including the kid from Iron Man 3, which is pretty cool. It would have been nice to have a little moment for Natasha after everything was said and done, but they still had that moment right before Hulk snapped everyone back into existence. So there's that at least. Thor eventually leaves New Asgard, makes Valkyrie the queen, and joins the Guardians of the Galaxy, who have all their members now except for Gamora because she's permanently dead, and the 2014 Gamora is still out there somewhere, so maybe that'll be the plot to Volume 3. And with James Gunn back as director and writer, who knows? We'll see. And then with Steve Rogers, he is the one that goes back to all these different time realms to return the stones and Mjolnir, but then he doesn't come back. At first, everyone thinks something's wrong, but then we see an old man sitting on a bench, and it's revealed to be Steve Rogers. Instead of going back in time after he returned everything, he decided to stay in the past and live out his life very peacefully. And Sam walks up to Steve Rogers, telling him that he's happy, but he's upset that he is going to be living in a world without Captain America. But then Steve brings the shield, which is brand new, gives it to Sam, and promotes him to be the new Captain America, which I was always against it just because we'd seen Bucky use the shield a lot more. But when they actually did it in the movie, I'm like, yeah, I can buy that. Bucky is still not that trustworthy considering that he's murdered a ton of people. And Sam Wilson, even though he might not have super soldier powers, he could still fly. He has a bunch of abilities that Steve and Bucky can't do. So It's a very nice moment. And then as Steve and Sam shake hands, Sam sees a wedding ring on Steve Rogers. And then the very last scene of the movie takes place in the 1940s, where Steve Rogers finally gets that dance with Peggy Carter. And watching this series in chronological order makes this moment even more sweeter. It makes it the perfect ending to this amazing series of films. Because in the first Avenger, his very last line was, "I had a date," and he was hoping to get that last dance with Peggy, but couldn't. And since they discovered time travel and he saw Peggy in the 70s, he now has a way to go back and live that life out. I don't know why people have a problem with this. It's like, Steve Rogers has done enough. If he wasn't going to die, then at least let him have a very nice life with the woman he loves, now that time travel's a possibility. And plus, he had everything taken away from him more than Thor did. So it's a fantastic way to bring everything full circle. And then the credits of the movie are particularly interesting. There's no stinger at the end of the movie, which I'm grateful for because this is the end of the Infinity Saga. But the first people that they list in terms of the actors are a lot of the supporting actors, like Don Cheadle, Brie Larson, Tessa Thompson, and they're all played to stock footage and clips from all the past movies. And then in terms of the original 6 Avengers, they go in reverse order in how they're credited. It goes Jeremy Renner, Scarlett Johansson, Chris Hemsworth, Mark Ruffalo, Chris Evans, and Robert Downey Jr. But what's interesting about their credits is that while stock footage is playing in the background, they show a 3D model of the characters and the actors' signatures, just as if the movie's saying, these are our main characters, they've been around the longest, they are the core Avengers. I mean, of course, we're going to see some of these characters later on, but in terms of all 6 of them being together and this being the final movie with the original 6 Avengers, it's a fantastic way to end it. And there you go, those are my thoughts on the spoiler aspects of Avengers Endgame. The last thing I really have to talk about is the Stan Lee cameo, because this is his very last one. And it's basically Stan Lee riding in a car in the 70s saying, "Hey man, make love, not war." And for being his last cameo, I was kind of underwhelmed, but it was actually cool to see a de-aged Stan Lee from the 70s, so not much to that one. If I had to pick between Stan Lee's last couple of cameos on which one was better, the ones from Spider-Verse and Captain Marvel were better, because they were actually more meaningful. But this is not a bad cameo itself, and there you go. That's my long-awaited spoiler review for Avengers Endgame. Wait, stop! Not quite done yet. Yeah, guys, this review was actually recorded a month ago. I recorded this and my spoiler review for Godzilla King of the Monsters back to back, but this one was just a pain to edit because of how long it turned out. And with the Avengers Endgame Bring Back event, where they're pretty much re-releasing the movie with some added material at the end, I figured to just wait, see the movie for my 6th time, and just give you my thoughts on those little bonus features at the end. Now, I want to make something clear right now. This is not an extended cut of Avengers Endgame. It just has a couple of extras that are at the end of the credits. Not a stinger. This movie still has no stinger, which I'm personally grateful for. But the movie opened up with an introduction by Anthony Russo, just thanking everyone on behalf of him, Joe, Kevin Feige, Marvel Studios, for the fan support throughout the 11 years this series has been going. And what are the actual extras? Well, the first one is a tribute to Stan Lee. It showcases all of his cameos in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, as Stan Lee's talking about how he created these characters just so he could pay the rent and make money. He never would have imagined in his lifetime that they would grow to become this huge phenomenon. And the interview is conducted on the set of Captain Marvel, which, as I've said before, is probably one of his more meaningful final cameos, that and Spider-Verse. And as if it wasn't enough for the theater to cry during this movie, there were still a couple people who were crying during the Stan Lee tribute, and it was beautiful. It's still hard to believe that this guy is gone, but the legacy that he left really has become something bigger than anybody could have ever imagined. Then they show an unfinished deleted scene, which was going to be the original introduction to Professor Hulk, where he's pretty much saving a group of people from a burning building just before he gets a call that Steve Rogers wants to meet him. And this is a scene that apparently the Russos were disappointed that they had to cut out, but I can see why, because it just would have slowed the movie down a little more. And plus, I think when we meet Professor Hulk in the diner, that's a better introduction to his character, because much like with Scott Lang, dying, we just look at Professor Hulk for the first time and go, I'm so confused right now. So I think that diner was a great enough setup for Professor Hulk and shows how much people have accepted the Hulk on Earth. And the last thing they show is a very, very short preview from Spider-Man Far From Home, which if you're excited for Spider-Man Far From Home, or you're one of the unlucky film critics who did not get to see the movie already, then this might satisfy your thirst. And all it is the first time Mysterio meets Nick Fury and Maria Hill in a demolished Mexican town. And you've seen some of these moments in the trailers, so there's not much to say. So in the end, were these extra moments really worth seeing Avengers Endgame in the theaters again? No, but really, you don't need a reason to see Avengers Endgame in the theaters again, because it's one of the best movies of the year, my favorite of the year so far, one of my favorite movies of the decade, and my favorite film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Yeah, I've had some time to think about this, and in my spoiler-free review, I mentioned that I would save the answer to, do I like this better than the first Avengers, for my spoiler review. This is the spoiler review, and I like this movie more than the first Avengers. And so with all that said, all those weeks and months of being delayed, that is my spoiler review for Avengers Endgame. So my thoughts on the Infinity Saga. I consider this the perfect superhero series out there. More than Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, more than the X-Men series, rightfully so, more than Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight series. I've never seen a series of films so consistent in terms of quality. Some might be better than others, obviously, but the heart of these movies are still there, the humor works most of the time, and the fact that they all keep a level of continuity is just unbelievable. When the entire Phase 3 slate was announced in 2014, I said to myself, once the final Avengers film is out, then I'm done with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But this movie actually made me more excited for the future, because we got Spider-Man Far From Home coming out, we have Phase 4 being announced at D23 in August, and we have several Disney Plus series coming out, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Loki, WandaVision, which is a terrible title, but I'm still excited to see more Scarlet Witch. I'm excited for whatever the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe has to offer. Now I want to know what you guys think about the spoilers in Endgame. Hopefully you've seen this movie, since it's creeping up on Avatar to be the highest grossing film of all time. But what were your favorite moments in Avengers Endgame? Which moments stuck to you as being that particular moment that you either cheered, laughed, or cried about? Whatever it may be, let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this review. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and of course leave a comment. Don't forget to support my Patreon page, follow me on social media, and until next time, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.